The old road to Devil's Creek wound like a black ribbon through the dense autumn forest, shrouded in mist that clung to the trees like ghostly fingers. Four friends, Maya, Alex, Jenna, and Ryan, drove in near silence, their headlights cutting through the fog but revealing little more than shadows. The air was sharp and cold, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. Legends whispered in the nearby town said the creek was cursed, that those who lingered too long sometimes vanished without a trace. Ryan, always drawn to danger, laughed nervously. "Come on, it's just a creek," he said, slapping the dashboard. "Spooky stories for tourists." Maya didn't respond. She stared out the window, unease curling in her stomach. Something about the creek didn't feel natural. Even the birds were silent. Jenna shivered beside her, wrapping her jacket tighter. "It feels wrong," she whispered, "like we're being watched." When they finally arrived, the creek lay in a narrow valley, its dark water moving sluggishly between gnarled trees. Fog rolled across the surface, giving the water an almost shimmering, unnatural quality. They parked and began setting up camp on a patch of dry ground near the creek's edge. Alex unpacked supplies, while Maya traced her fingers along the carved words on an old, weathered sign. "Turn back, danger awaits." "Who leaves signs like this in the middle of nowhere?" Ryan scoffed, tossing a flashlight onto the grass. He strode closer to the water, the muddy bank squelching under his boots. Then he froze. "Did you hear that?" A faint whisper drifted across the creek, soft and insistent. Ryan strained his ears. "Hello?" he called. The whisper responded with his own voice, mimicking him perfectly. Goosebumps rose on his arms. "What the hell?" Alex muttered, stepping closer. The fog seemed thicker now, curling around them in slow, rolling waves. Maya's heart pounded as she scanned the water. Shadows shifted unnaturally along the banks, darker than the mist should have allowed. Jenna's voice trembled. "It's calling someone." Her eyes darted to the tree line, where shapes moved just out of the light's reach. The wind carried soft, unintelligible murmurs, voices that seemed to float over the water, repeating fragments of words, names, and laughter. Ryan laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "It's just echoes. The wind. Nothing's out there." But even as he said it, his gaze was fixed on a figure that seemed to shimmer in the mist. It was indistinct, blurred, but unmistakably human-shaped, and it was moving toward them. Maya grabbed his arm. "We should leave," she said urgently. "Now!" Before anyone could respond, the creek rippled violently, as if something beneath its surface had awakened, and then they heard it clearly, a voice, soft and urgent, whispering a name that made Maya's blood run cold. "Maya." The friends froze, the fog thickened, the shadows danced closer. The creek had begun calling, and it seemed to know exactly who it wanted first. Night fell fully over Devil's Creek, and the forest seemed to close in around the four friends. The fog thickened, curling around the trees like living tendrils, muffling their footsteps. Every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves made them jump. Ryan, trying to shrug off the fear, wandered toward the creek's edge again, drawn by the water's faint luminescent glow. "Ryan, stay close!" Maya called, gripping Alex's arm, but her words barely carried over the low, persistent whispering that seemed to come from the creek itself. The whispers weren't just sounds, they were taunting, calling out fragments of their own thoughts, their secrets, their fears. Jenna's hands trembled as she covered her ears. They explored the surrounding woods, hoping to find some clue or path that could lead them away from the unnatural water. That's when they noticed it. Symbols etched deep into the bark of several trees, strange markings that twisted unnaturally, almost moving when viewed from the corner of their eyes. Alex knelt down, brushing dirt off one of the carvings. These aren't natural," he muttered, "like someone or something made them." Suddenly, a splash echoed through the fog. Ryan had stepped too close to the water and disappeared without a sound. Panic erupted instantly. "Ryan!" Maya screamed, her voice cracking as she ran toward the creek. The others followed, their flashlights trembling in the dense mist, but the only trace of him was a series of muddy footprints leading into the water. And then, nothing. The whispers intensified, repeating Ryan's name, then Alex's, then Jenna's, mocking them. Maya could barely hear herself think over the cacophony of voices. She grabbed Jenna and pulled her back. "We need to leave, now!" Alex shook his head stubbornly. "We can't just leave him. There has to be a way to save him. There's always a way." Maya's stomach churned with fear. Every instinct screamed to run, but curiosity and dread kept them rooted near the creek. That's when they noticed it. Faint figures in the fog, just across the water, rising slowly. They were humanoid, but blurred, shifting constantly as if the creek itself shaped them. One stepped forward, calling out in Ryan's voice, "Come to me." Jenna gasped and stumbled back, tripping over a root. Maya caught her just in time. The whispers now repeated their names in rapid succession, faster and more insistent. The fog thickened around them, swirling in unnatural patterns, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward them. Maya's eyes locked on the water, and she realized the truth. The creek wasn't just haunted, it was alive, feeding on their fear, learning their weaknesses, and worse, it was playing with them. Alex stepped toward the water, drawn by the voice of Ryan calling for help. Maya grabbed his arm. "Don't!" she shouted, but his eyes were distant, almost glazed. The creek had begun to pull at him, whispering promises and threats that twisted his mind. The friends had reached the point of no return. The creek was no longer just a silent observer. It was a predator. And in that moment, Maya knew that surviving the night at Devil's Creek would demand more than courage. It would demand confronting the darkness they hadn't even realized existed. The night at Devil's Creek pressed down on the friends like a living weight. The fog had grown impossibly thick, muting sounds and making shadows dance in ways that defied logic. Ryan was gone, and Alex, still dazed by the whispers calling him, refused to leave. Maya and Jenna clung to each other, hearts hammering, as the creek seemed to pulse like a heartbeat beneath the inky black water. Maya remembered the old journal she had spotted in the underbrush while searching for Ryan. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, the handwriting frantic and almost unreadable. As she flipped it open, the story became clear. Devil's Creek was cursed by an ancient, malevolent entity that fed on fear, grief, and secrets. Victims were lured by voices they recognized, voices of loved ones or even echoes of their own thoughts. Once drawn too close, the entity dragged them into the water, never to return, at least not in the way they once were. A sudden splash jolted them both. Figures began to rise from the creek, shadows twisted into distorted forms of their missing friends. Ryan's face appeared first, pale and hollow, lips moving though no sound came. The whispers intensified, echoing fragments of the journal. Feed the fear, name them, claim them. Jenna froze, her eyes wide with terror. It's not them, it's using them. Her voice cracked as a shadowy hand reached toward her, dripping black water that smelled of decay. Maya grabbed her and pulled her backward. We have to face it. We have no choice. Alex, shaking off the trance that had drawn him toward the creek, finally realized the danger. He backed away, horror etched on his face. It's showing us our fears, he said, voice trembling. All of them. One by one, the creek conjured images of their deepest insecurities. Maya saw herself abandoning everyone she loved. Alex saw the consequences of his pride, the friends he had betrayed in the past. Jenna saw every regret she had ever tried to bury. The shadows whispered, repeating secrets that only the entity could know. The friends realized survival depended on acknowledgement, not denial. They had to confront their fears aloud. "I'm afraid of losing you," Maya shouted, her voice cutting through the whispers. "I won't let it take us." She held Jenna close, facing the shadows. The water roiled violently, the figures contorting and lashing out like living shadows. But for a moment, the creek paused, as if listening. Ryan's hollow eyes met Maya's, and she understood. They had to resist the lure, not fight it blindly. The whispers became frantic, almost panicked. The creek's pull weakened slightly, giving them a chance to regroup. But the entity was far from defeated. It had tasted their fear and secrets. It would not forget. Maya took a deep breath. "We need to leave, now." The friends linked arms, inching backward from the creek, their every battle a battle against the shadows that clawed at their minds. Even as they retreated, the creek continued to shimmer unnaturally in the fog. A voice called again, soft, insistent, almost intimate. "Maya." The entity was patient. It would wait. It would hunt again. The night was far from over, and the true horror of Devil's Creek was only beginning to unfold. Dawn had not yet broken, but the oppressive fog at Devil's Creek began to thin slightly, revealing twisted, skeletal trees and the dark water that still seemed alive. Maya, Jenna, and Alex pressed forward, hearts hammering, knowing Ryan was still somewhere in the creek's grasp, or worse, no longer fully himself. The journal had told them survival meant confronting the entity, not running, but facing it felt impossible. The creek's surface rippled unnaturally as shadows began to rise again, this time taller, more menacing. The whispers returned, calling each of their names, twisting their memories, speaking of regrets and failures only they could know. Maya swallowed hard, forcing herself to step forward. "We face it," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Together." A shape began to coalesce from the black water, a towering, fluid-like figure with Ryan's hollow eyes at its center. Its voice split into dozens of echoes, each one a perfect imitation of someone they had loved. "Come, stay, you belong," it whispered, the air around them thick with cold and dread. Alex shook violently, but forced himself to speak. "You don't control us. We know what you are." His words cut through the whispers like a knife. Jenna joined him, shouting her own fear aloud, naming her regrets and refusing to hide. Maya stepped forward last, staring directly into the shadow's shifting form. "We are not yours. We will not be afraid of you." For a tense moment, the creek stilled. The shadows wavered, then recoiled as if stung. The entity let out a horrifying, wordless scream that echoed through the fog. Ryan's body staggered forward, free from the creek's pull, though his eyes remained pale and empty, a haunting reminder that the darkness had left its mark. They ran. The mud sucked at their boots, roots tripped them, and the whispering followed, persistent but weakened. Every step forward was a battle, every breath a defiance against the malevolent presence. Behind them, the water's surface shimmered one last time before settling into an unnatural calm. By the time they reached their car, the first pale light of dawn streaked the sky. They piled in silently, each too exhausted and terrified to speak. The creek lay behind them, deceptively calm, as if nothing had happened. Ryan sat slumped in the back seat, eyes hollow, the whispers of the night etched forever into his expression. As they drove away, Maya glanced back at the creek one last time. The shadows seemed to retreat into the depths, but the water glimmered faintly, almost like a smile. She shivered, realizing the journal's warning was true. The entity never truly let go. And then, faintly, carried on the morning breeze, she heard it again, a soft, intimate whisper that made her blood run cold. "Maya." Her heart leapt, and she gripped the steering wheel tighter. The horror of Devil's Creek had followed them, not physically, but in a way far more insidious. It had tasted fear, learned their names, and the memory of that night would haunt them forever. Somewhere beneath the dark waters, the entity waited patiently, ready to call out to its next victims when the night fell again. The forest fell silent behind them, but the whispers lingered, impossible to ignore, echoing in their minds long after they had left the cursed creek behind.